Hey folks, welcome to the Leeds Gamer. Just before we get into the video, do please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you could, please also hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future content. And please be sure to give this video a like as well. That would be massively appreciated. This video is a few days late, but this video goes out to two of my Scottish friends, Kevin and Rob, and a bit of a shout out to Ryan118, who's a big Celtic YouTuber and also commentates for ICW, Insane Championship Wrestling in Scotland. So yeah, what a final day. Kind of mixed with some controversy. But Glasgow Celtic have gone on to win the SPL, Scottish Premiership, on a dramatic final day of the season. So, what you can see in front of you at the moment is where the standings were just before the split. Now, I only found out this season that with a few games to go, the division splits. So the top half all play against each other and the bottom half all play against each other. But this was the standings of the table before the split. So they'd played 33 games. Hearts were on top, 3 points ahead of Celtic, 1 point ahead of Rangers. At this particular juncture, Motherwell had started to drift off. As you can see, their form at that point wasn't particularly good. But up until, I think it was a match between Celtic and Motherwell, Motherwell were only 3 points off Celtic and were still just about in the title race. With Celtic winning that match, it meant that it then became a three-team race as opposed to a 4-team. And with that form being as bad as it was for Motherwell, they ended up finishing closer to Hibs than they did to Celtic. So at this particular point, as you can see, it had become a three-horse race really. All of the top three in pretty good form at this point, and yeah, it was anyone's game. And what made for quite a competitive top six going into the split. And as you can see there, at that juncture, 6 points between Falkirk and Dundee United. So a sizable enough gap between the top half and bottom half at that point. So, going on to the split. So as you can see there, just before I put it all on, they played up to 33 games before the split, and then there's 38 games in total. You can see the second phase relegation group, which consisted of Dundee United, and actually finished with Dundee clawing up a place there, above Aberdeen, just narrowly finishing closely behind their local rivals. Aberdeen drop a place, Kilmarnock finishing just above the bottom two. So it looks as if Kilmarnock actually went up a place. Yeah, so they dropped St Mirren into that second bottom area, and Livingston have just struggled all season with a terrible record at the end of it really. Only winning 2 games all season, which is insanely poor. So that's how the bottom half of the table finished, and actually relatively close between those four in Dundee United, Dundee, Aberdeen and Kilmarnock, only separated by 5 points in the end. But the real fun part of the Scottish Premiership was in the second phase championship group. It finished with Falkirk actually being a bit closer to Dundee United than what they were to Hibs in the end. Kind of drifted off with only one win in their final games there, as you can see on the form guide. Then you got Hibs, who have probably been seething all season that their local rivals, Hearts, have been doing so well. But then again, maybe on the other hand, maybe they were thinking, you know what, it's a good thing for Scottish football that there's someone involved in the title race aside from just Celtic and Rangers. But ultimately, as you can see there, it finished with Falkirk in 6th, Hibs 5th, Motherwell, who, as I say, had just dropped off in the end. But up to a point, they were making it a 4-team race as opposed to a 3-team race. But they dropped off, but they were good enough to stay in 4th. And then Rangers went on a horrendously bad run of form. And they dropped like a bloody stone, still finishing in 3rd. But were decidedly rubbish for the final stretch, which was obviously music to the ears of anyone who prefers Glasgow Celtic. Me, on a personal level, I've always preferred Celtic over Rangers. I just feel that Rangers are the Man United of Scottish football. Total scum, can't stand them, bunch of cheats, etc. But that's just my opinion. And so, yeah, Rangers dropped off in the end, so it became just a 2-team race in this final stretch, and what a race it was. Hearts were top of the league going into the final game, but the final game was Celtic versus Hearts, and Hearts were broken right at the death, because Celtic ran out, I think it was 3-1 in the end. And, credit has to go to Hearts of Midlothian, because they have had one of the best seasons that they've had in probably all of my lifetime. And I'm going to be 42 in July. So Hearts finished in 2nd place, having played 38 games. They won 24 games, which is a pretty good record. Drew 8, only lost 6. They scored 67, only conceded 34. It's a good defence in the end, really. And actually finished with a slightly better goal difference than Celtic. Even Rangers did as well, actually. But they finished on 80 points, and it wasn't quite enough, because that final win on the final day for Celtic meant that they finished the season on 38 games played, 26 games won, only drawing 4, but they did lose 8. But they scored more, they scored 73, but conceded a few more by conceding 41. But crucially, they finished on 82 points, and look at that form guide. The difference of just one draw for Hearts, whereas Celtic won all of their final games there. And yeah, what a final match. There was one or two what some people might feel were contentious decisions that happened in that final match as well. And a couple of things at the end of the match that didn't look incredibly savoury either. But in the end, Glasgow Celtic come away with yet another title. Now, my take on Celtic is, and I'm sure that people like Kev and Rob and Ryan will be able to correct me if I'm wrong, But I think Celtic need an absolute squad rebuild this summer. They need to decide who's going to be manager. Some Celtic fans were saying on TalkSport that they reckon O'Neill will stay on even beyond this summer, which would be very surprising. I mean, O'Neill's in his mid-70s now. Now, some people have suggested maybe O'Neill could go into a more technical role within the club rather than being the manager. So maybe like a sporting director or a director of football, or go into some kind of advisory role, or maybe even step down to being like an assistant manager with a younger manager, taking the reins. Maybe someone that's already on the coaching team, and just have Martin there to obviously, be a guide and be an experienced head next to a younger coach. So there's all these potential options going on, and as we know, with Celtic, they don't have the kind of money that a lot of the teams in the English Premier League have, so they're not going to be able to buy players for 20, 30, 40, 50 million pounds. Their most expensive signing of this summer coming up probably won't be any more than £10 million. So they will have to be pretty savvy in the market. They'll probably have to look at some of the best players that have become out of contract, because not every out of contract player this summer is going to be, deep into the mid-30s or anything like that. I mean, a prime example is Leeds United goalkeeper Illan Meslier, who's only 25-year-old, maybe 26. I actually think that Illan would be a fantastic signing for Celtic on a free transfer, because bearing in mind Kasper Schmeichel's either retiring completely or leaving Celtic this summer, now that he's about 40-year-old. So I think that would be a very useful pickup for Celtic if they were to consider it, and if Illan was to consider the option as well, of course. The option of playing in Champions League football could be enticing to a player like Illan. Playing in a big stadium, 60,000, Celtic Park, who knows? But, Celtic winning it, they've won the title over 50 times as far as I'm aware, so this is nothing new to Celtic. But what will be new to Celtic and Celtic fans is that they've got it on the final day. This was a very, very nervy and difficult time for Celtic in terms of not knowing, they didn't have assurances that they were actually going to win the title this year, and that's down to the work of Derek McInnes and the Hearts squad. They've just been very, very good. Hence why they've finished comfortably ahead of Rangers and everybody else, apart from Celtic. Celtic obviously had that blip in the middle of the season when they decided to hire Wilfred Nancy, which was an absolute disaster. They sacked him, and it wasn't after that many games, but it was a chunk of games where Celtic didn't get any points, or hardly any, and then Martin O'Neill's come in and steadied the ship. I think O'Neill came in after Brendan Rodgers left initially. Apologies, folks. I thought my phone's volume was not on. Oh, damn. Anyway, so yeah, there was a point where O'Neill came in for a few games and he got lots of wins, and then for some reason they didn't keep O'Neill on for the entirety of the rest of the season. They decided to hire Wilfred Nancy, which was a disaster. And then once they sacked Nancy, they asked O'Neill if he'd come back again, which he did. So O'Neill has actually had 2 spells in charge of Celtic this season, which is a bit bonkers. But it's just about paid off in the end. But their squad is poor for the level that they feel they should be at. And there's probably, like when I had a look at the Celtic squad, there's only about I would say maybe half a dozen to maybe 10 players that are good enough to stay out of their senior players. I think the rest have got to go, and they need to bring in some fresh blood. They probably need to pick up some Scottish players, or players that have played in the Scottish League long enough to be classed as homegrown. And then they need to get into the foreign market and bring in a couple of players that could be some absolute bargains. But again, as we know with Celtic, their budget will be limited. There's just not enough money in Scottish football. So it will be an interesting summer for the Hoops. But they can go into it now knowing that they won the league. I think there's another Scottish Cup final that they can try and win as well. I don't know if it's the Scottish League Cup or the Scottish FA Cup or Scottish Cup, whatever it's called anyway. But there is one more domestic cup for Celtic to have a go at. I think the final's against Dunfermline, and they're not even in the Scottish Premiership this season. They have been in the past, so that'll be a very interesting match. So I'm sure Celtic will do everything they can to win that. Celtic are a club that have, prided themselves on getting as much domestic silverware as they possibly can, due to the fact that they've only ever really had one creditable level of opponent, and that's in their Glasgow neighbours Rangers. So yeah, I'll leave it there, folks, but that is the end result up north of the border. It has finished with Glasgow Celtic winning yet another Scottish Premiership. So for any of the Scottish viewers, do please put your thoughts in the comments below. You could be a Celtic fan, you could be a Hearts fan, you could be a fan of any of the other clubs in Scotland. Yeah, let me know your thoughts on it, and what do you think this does for Scottish football with Hearts, mixing it with the big boys now? Does that change anything for Scottish football? Does it get a bit more exposure to the league? Does it create a bit more revenue for the clubs, especially in that top six? Again, apologies for the phone going ding. Yeah, do please let me know. Again, do please do all that good stuff as well. With subscribing to the channel, please like the video and hit that notification bell. But in the meantime, folks, have a good one. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.